my lips have I declared all the judgments of thy mouth. I have rejoiced in the way of thy testimonies, as much as in all riches. I will meditate in thy precepts and have respect to thy ways. I will delight myself in thy statutes. I will not forget thy word. Deal bountifully with thy servant, that I may live and keep thy word.
Good morning.
With my lips have I declared all the...
Okay, I gotta turn off the loop setting. All right, so we're continuing in the book of Psalms. I just realized I've adjusted my microphone down. There we go, that's better. Continuing in the book of Psalms, we're in chapter 14, or Psalm 14. It's not really a chapter. All right, just getting this little beeping in my ear is going to drive me insane. Okay. Again, Psalm 14 begins, to the chief musician, a psalm of David. I'm going to say one more time. I'm going to say probably 150 more times, or 136 more times. To the chief musician probably belongs to the next psalm. But since... I was going to say, since the next one begins also the same way, it doesn't matter because they're all to the chief musician, but they're not. A psalm of David. The fool hath said in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt. They have done abominable works. There is none that doeth good. The Lord looked down from heaven upon the children of men, to see if there were any that did understand, that did seek God. They are all gone aside. They are all together become filthy. There is none that doeth good, no, not one. Have all the workers of iniquity no knowledge, who eat up my people as they eat bread, and call not upon the Lord? There were they in great fear, for God is in the generation of the righteous. Ye have shamed the counsel of the poor, because the Lord is his refuge. I thought it was let's get to all the whole thing. Oh, that the salvation of Israel were come out of Zion, when the Lord bringeth back the captivity of his people. Jacob shall rejoice, and Israel shall be glad. Okay, so it's the chief musician. Okay, I'm sorry, I started thinking about other things. Alright, let's just analyze it bit by bit here. The fool hath said in his heart, there is no God. Again, it's real easy to point at people who actually say this and to say they're fools. That is not the approach that I find to be effective at all when trying to talk to people who don't believe in God. Because this is not meant, I think, in terms of, someone who's trying to arrive at a philosophical position. Meaning someone who's trying to, think about the very existence of God from a purely abstract point of view. Meaning that disbelief in God is most foolish at the moral level. because what it says there, they are corrupt, they have done abominable works. There's none that doeth good. Because doing good is an outward expression of the fear of God. Because from a purely materialistic point of view, a purely rational point of view, while one can rationalize good to some degree based on, well, if I don't do good, bad things might happen to me, because of legal systems and such. There's no rational reason that if you have the power, if you could eliminate the negative consequences to yourself, there is no rational reason to do good. People say, well, just do good for the... well, you can say that, but that's still not a rational basis. It's not an actual rational, materialistic basis. And rational is maybe a little bit too low a bar for them to jump. Like I said, from a sense of just the material world, there is no right or wrong. There just is and isn't. There's just exists and not exists. There's just what happens. Like the grass grows, the flower fades, life springs up, and life goes down to the dust. But to say there's anything right or wrong about it gets into the realm of the transcendent. Anything that happens in our life is either right or wrong. It's some sort of, whether it be our own actions or things that happen to us or just things that generally happen in the world. If there is a right or wrong, we are in the realm of God. And so even if someone has a philosophical position that they don't believe in God, which of course I completely disagree with and I think is whatever. My thoughts on it aren't so important as the fact that I just disagree. That if they do good, and there is none that doeth good, right, in the perfect sense, in the sense of that God would look at it. If God would look at us and try to find, is there any corruption in them, in human beings? Well, human beings have corruption in them. There is. Because sometimes human beings behave as if there is no good, if there is no ultimate right, or they don't seek it. And so we take actions that if you analyzed the actions would be indicative of one who did not fear God, of one who did not believe in God. Because I remember, from my experience, there are times when I have wrestled with sin, because I was grieved that I believed in the forgiveness of Christ. I was grieved that somehow in my life there was still manifesting sinful things. And how does one overcome those things? It's a question, by the blood of the Lamb. Okay, but but help me out here. Well, you'll just want to. It's like, help me out here. I try to want to, but Paul said, that which I will, I do not, and blah, blah. Yeah, I'm aware of that situation. What do I do about it? I just accept that? That's just, hey, oh wretched man that I am, Jesus can't do anything for me? No, that's not what it says. Wait a second. Oh wretched man that I am, who shall save me from this body of death? So God has some role to play in saving us, not just ultimately through the resurrection, but also through the reformation of our character, which is his work in us. He works in us to reform us and to change us. It is his work that is even finished from the foundation of the world. But I don't yet see it manifest. So that's something I'm concerned about, right? But I would do these things, and even when I want to do good, I know that I would ask myself, well, because I wanted to do good, I said, when I do these things, it's not that anywhere in my heart I don't believe there's a God, but on some level I think he doesn't care, or it just doesn't matter. But the truth is, the scripture says he does care, and it does matter. You know what I mean? So my behavior, when I do these things, it's bordering on unbelief. Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. It's not like unpardonable offense, but it is something we need to correct. Because in that line of thinking, we become fools. And we know we're fools. Very often we sin and we know we're fools. We're foolish. We allow ourselves to be manipulated by the seductions of sin, whether it be for pleasures for a season or for whatever. Usually sin is some sort of trying to bring you some good thing, or so you think you're going to get good out of it. Whether it be external sensual pleasure or internal satisfaction pleasure of one sort or the other, depending on what you're talking about. We're pleasing ourselves, not pleasing God. And it is very foolish to say so in our heart, because because in some ways, everyone knows there is right and wrong, except for a very rare number of human beings who don't, or genuinely, or they've just decided to disregard. I don't know. I can't understand on some certain level. I've always had an innate sense of rightness and wrongness, and it's not always correct. But that strength idea that there is a moral truth in the world. Yeah, I mean that. Science can only tell you. The material world can only tell you, like I said, is and isn't, and questions like that. They're not going to tell you right or wrong, morally, ultimately. They can only give you a subjective right or wrong based on for your survival. But eventually you can just make the question sufficiently complex that there is no rational right or wrong anymore. It must transcend into some other realm, some other basis. There has to be just an objective right or wrong in something. Or at least we have to believe that it's somehow not so much objective as it is arbitrary. It's because there's no accounting for the exact reason that is right or wrong, because it's not based on reason. It's based on something else, a moral truth. Human beings are corrupt. They have done abominable works. There's none that doeth good. Sometimes there's some very pessimistic psalms. Just like it says, the righteous perish from the earth. There's none left. They're all where have all the good men gone? In the previous psalms we were studying, there were similar sentiments, right? Like in 12 and stuff. The godly man ceaseth, the faithful fail from among the children of men. And again, remember, you don't have to justify everything said in a psalm as far as in your understanding, because they're innately songs and pleas and prayers, and that is the nature of much of what is in the Psalms. Just like when Elijah says, Lord, they have killed thy prophets and digged down thine altars, and I alone am left. And the Lord says, I have reserved unto me 7,000 men that have not bowed the knee to Baal. What do you mean you're the only one left? It's not true. You're not the only one. You think you're alone. You think you're absolutely isolated, but you're not. And even so, when God does talk about righteous men in the earth, I mean, sometimes it is. Noah was there's just Noah. And even when you're the only righteous man, when there's we can say that there's none left except one. I always say, and I believe this to the very core of my being, that even when God says Noah is righteous, that is on the basis of being gracious in interpretation of what that means. Meaning, Noah was righteous, but, he got off the ark and planted a vineyard and got drunk and, and all this stuff. It's it's not necessarily, yes, oftentimes God, when he declares human beings to be good, it's relatively good, and it's by comparison with other people. But there's another sense in which you could look at humanity and you don't compare people with people in relative good, but you try to look for an absolute good. Is there anyone who's absolutely good? That's why Jesus, when they called him good master, he says, why do you call me good when there is none good but God? And that's not a denial of his divinity. It's not anything of the sort. It's just saying, why do you do these things? You know, he knows that person doesn't look at him as God. And then on a certain level, the calling of men good must be taken with a certain level of understanding that there is a limited good to man. That there's an inherent amount of corruption. Some people don't like, I guess, I don't know. I've never really, I realize that some, like the Calvinists and such have the idea of total depravity. And I believe that, what it means is man is unable to do anything for himself. He is completely sinful in his nature. Totally. I don't know if, total depravity, even without God, some men are relatively good. Like you think about total depravity, you're talking about in terms of in the absolute judgment of God, no man comes out clean. We just don't. There are none who come out clean. And so I don't know. I guess some people don't. That doctrine, I've heard people talk about it, or I felt like they were alluding to it, like talking about sinful man. And I think they get confused in thinking, and sometimes maybe people who believe in it get confused in thinking that it means they're just totally depraved and there's nothing to be done about it, and there's no new man to put on, there's no transformative work of Christ in their life. I don't know if that's the case. I know, and from my understanding of Scripture, what I think of in terms of man being depraved or man being of a sinful nature, it does mean that I can't really redeem my situation in the sight of God. Meaning I can't, even though, like let's say I'm better than I am. You know what I mean? Which means I'm less sinful than Paul ever was. I mean, and then I'm a pretty good guy, or whatever. Let's say I just am exactly as I am, right? I haven't killed anybody. I haven't slept with another man's wife or given myself to someone else instead of my wife. Anything like that. I haven't. Have I ever lied under oath? I don't think so. It's like we won't go any further into that than to just say like, yeah, right, exactly. I haven't been exactly sworn in many times. And so I could look at a lot of the commandments or, things people would, I've never swindled anybody that I'm aware of. I certainly never consciously tried to give anyone a raw deal or to do harm to anybody, certainly in a financial way. I could look at my life and I could say hey, there's not that many bad things, big bad things. Like big bad things that people would say when you look at certain historical characters, like who've done, who've been responsible for the deaths of millions and stuff like that. People. It's really easy to look at people who are responsible for the deaths of millions and say they're bad people, and they deserve hell, or they deserve, the second death. However, whatever perspective you're going to take on the ultimate punishment of the wicked, it doesn't matter. They deserve the ultimate punishment. Right? We can look at them and say they deserve the ultimate punishment because they've done some really horrible things. But here's the thing. The Scriptures teach that it's not just the most wicked of the wicked that have the ultimate punishment. It's just that all mankind, it's one of the things that the Ecclesiastes laments about, that we'll all experience the same fate. We all ultimately die. And it seems like the ultimate fate the ultimate outcome of life is death. And they felt like there was something exceedingly troubling about that. That's why we have an idea of the judgment. Because we know that at the end of life, things are left uneven. Things are somehow, justice is not always done. You know what I mean? As far as the way we perceive it. In a subjective sense, it's like, well, he killed millions. She was just a girl. And he had her killed. So where's, and then he was dead. And they're all dead. And where is justice done? It's a particularly troubling human question for human beings. And the answer of God to such things is that ultimately, no matter how much my life is not like that as bad as someone who's killed millions, when I'm trying to justify myself in terms of, okay, well, let's say let's say they're totally evil, like some World War II character you might think of. I'm not gonna mention any names, lest they get picked out and I don't know, maybe it's like the logarithm will pick up on whatever. I've heard people avoid saying names of certain historical figures lest it get somehow read by the censorious robots who lord it over us. I don't know. But anyways, you can think of someone who's like the ultimate character of evil, and say like, well, they definitely deserve the ultimate punishment. And then, well, what does someone who deserves everlasting life look like? Is it how different from that ultimate evil person is the person who is going to receive the ultimate good? I mean, who's going to receive the ultimate blessing? If the worst person in the world is worthy of the everlasting punishment that is, I have no trouble with that kind of language, because to me, second death is everlasting punishment. It's punishment that lasts forever, and if you want to take a more traditional view, it's still everlasting punishment. So they're worthy of the ultimate punishment. Okay, how does one become worthy of the ultimate gift? Everlasting life. How does one make oneself worthy of God's salvation? And the answer is that even in my life, which is kind of not as sinful maybe as the worst person ever, I don't know where exactly I am on the spectrum of good and evil, right? Maybe I'm much closer to maybe I'm a lot closer to being the ultimate good than I am to being the ultimate evil. It's on a human scale. Even so, I have not reached the point where I'm actually worthy of the ultimate good. You know what I mean? I haven't achieved that because I'm not the ultimate good person. You know what I mean? Like someone who is less than, someone who's gotten really good but had some taint in their character. What kind of thing? I don't know, told some lie. I mean, here's the point: is human beings, in some way, find themselves short of that goal. Even the best of us are short of the goal that would be, or short of of having the personal qualities which merit everlasting life. We all come short of it. That's the mark. The mark there is Jesus Christ. He is the one who is the mark of the man we mark, the man we look at, the man who we use for an example to understand what that might look like. So we all find ourselves short. All have sinned and come short of the glory of God, as it's written, right? And so we all have some abominable work. Abominable work. I've never done anything abominable. You mean like sodomy or something like that? Well, that's an abominable work, no doubt. But also, as it says in the Proverbs, a lying tongue is an abomination to the Lord. If you've ever lied, you've done an abominable work. Corrupted the truth, it shows like, I don't believe in God because I think that this idle word that is a lie is actually, I'm effectually misleading someone. God's looking at me. Think about it. Someone who misleads people about the truth. There's so much complicated moral things going on. On one hand, it's like I'm manipulating someone. I maybe don't trust them. I don't love them. But I also feel, I could just maybe avoid this, somehow avoid it maybe, or I don't know. Or maybe I could just speak the truth. Because of one reason or the other, we want to lie. And sometimes we feel so trapped in it because of the human nature of our interactions, meaning we're interacting with other sinful human beings, and they also drag us down into this mire of sin. I'm lying to someone because they're a sinful person in my life who I have to have this relationship with, but who I have some desire to control reality around our relationship, or reality around just whatever, around their perceptions, or get them to think something. And so while we trust each other enough to have a relationship, I also do not trust them enough to give them the truth nor do I fear God enough to stop myself from lying. There's a lot of wickedness inherent in our doings. It's not all on one. And it's not all the ultimate evil either. But it's like a man that will lie over small things. Why wouldn't he lie over big things? I mean, maybe it's true. Maybe it's like, hey, I've lied about a lot of little things, but I won't lie about this big thing. Maybe sometimes, but a lot of times it's like you have all the more reason to lie about the big thing. There's so much more at stake. So why wouldn't you use the same tool you used over the small thing to get past a difficult moment? He is faithful in that which is least, is faithful also in that which is much. That's what Jesus said. It doesn't mean that someone can't step up when the chips are down, because oftentimes people do. But if people do step up and do right when the chips aren't down, when it's not a big deal, if you can learn to be truthful in small ways, it will give you the ability to more likely tell the truth as those situations become more and more high pressure, as those situations become more and more, when there's more and more at stake, to be able to tell the truth when it is not convenient to you, or it may cause you great inconvenience, is a difficult thing. We lie very often for convenience. That's one of the big reasons people lie. It's just more convenient. I mean, I've so casually lied just to avoid a certain conversation. Like I've lied in such a way as just to shut things down, because I just didn't want to deal with someone on it. Yeah, sure, yeah. Because it's not even a big deal, but it matters to them. But the reason it matters to them may come out of some sinful thing in them. That's what I'm saying. Like, the sin of the world just draws you down into corruption and sin. It's like a black hole sucking us downward. It's like in our nature. And God looks down, this is, whenever it says things like this, it's like, was he talking about some specific day? No, it's just talking about God's general disposition of God is in his heaven looking at men, examining them. See if there were any that did understand, that sought God, that knew that God, I must find God, and by finding God and the ultimate right and wrong, by seeking God to know right and wrong, I might, through that knowledge, be able to do it. Because a lot of times we don't even know. Like, we're so trapped in situations, in human situations, in worldly situations, that we can't even think properly because we have no knowledge. And like I said, for me, it's like the most important kind of knowledge. I discovered this, now it's been years ago, but it was not early in my walk. Early in my walk, I thought of knowledge as like, hey, the angels that sinned. Hey, do you know what happened in the garden? Hey, did you know that Jesus was crucified on Wednesday? Hey, did you know that, for some people, the Sabbath is Saturday. Hey, did you know that you shouldn't eat pork? Hey, did you know that these are the names of the kings of Israel and Judah? Did you know that there are 66 books in the Bible? And I'll list them now: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, Ruth, Samuel, Kings, Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes. Why am I listing? Song of Solomon, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi. I think I didn't skip any. I might have, because I haven't run through that list in my mind in years. I've been in the Bible, I haven't run through the list to make sure I had it memorized properly. I might have left one out. I mean, God knows I can't remember all my kids' names from time to time, so forgive me, right? But that is not the kind of knowledge that is the most useful or the most important. The most useful and important kind of knowledge is the kind that informs our understanding so that we can make the correct moral decision. I mean, to know that what God's way in a given situation is, and not every situation it's obvious. Not every situation do we realize that we even ought to be looking for God's way, because we think we just see the easy way. We see the way our human understanding has led us to believe is the most effectual route for us. Oftentimes not considering a moral question of right and wrong. It's just a question of convenience or inconvenience, a question of pleasure or no pleasure. And we make decisions based on those things. The Lord looked down from heaven upon the children of men to see if there were any that did understand and seek God. They are all gone aside. They are all together become filthy. There is none that doeth good, no, not one. And so that's what he finds. He looks down and he says, they're all gone. That's what God sees. That we have all gone aside. We are all together become filthy. We're all dirty in one way or the other. We're all, people think, I'm holier than you. Or they'll think, I'm less sinful than you. That's a much more common mentality. Holier than thou, people say, oh, I'm not holy. And they know there's a verse out there somewhere in the Bible that talks about being holier than thou. It's actually, Isaiah 64, 65? Stand by, 64 or 65, it's one of those. I think it's 65. Stand by yourself. These are smoking my nails, whatever. It's 64, 65. God says it's a smoke in his nose, a fire that burns all the day. God doesn't like people who grade themselves based on looking around themselves and saying, well, I'm not as bad as that guy, or I'm better than him. God isn't grading on a curve. He's not just like saying, like, okay, well, we're going to have a certain number of people get saved and a certain number of people not. And how are we going to do that? Well, I'm putting in slots for so many people getting saved, right? And we'll just look at all the people, and we'll take the top billion people, okay, of all history, and we'll say the best billion people go to heaven. And everyone else, they get the ultimate punishment. That's not how God looks at things. It doesn't. I mean, and on some level, you could say, well, maybe that's the right thing to do. Just take the best people. Where would you find yourself there? I don't know. I don't know if I'd find myself. Certainly not the me. Exactly. When do you measure this? When do you take your measurement of who the best people are? Do you measure it at birth? At 19? At 50? Where do we get this census taken of like where people are and what they deserve? It's not, it's not that, we don't have any real conceptualization of our own. Well, maybe we do, we should have a proper, what I should say is like, we need to take proper, what the psalmist is saying is that this is how God sees reality. And we should try to see, to have the knowledge of God is to begin to see the world the way God sees it. To look at the sons of men and see them as God sees them. Not as like, well, I'm not as bad as him, but God looking down at me and saying, you are corrupt. It's easy to point the finger at people and say, look at those atheists. What fools. They don't believe in God. But then when I go and behave in such a way as though God did not exist, and I commit an abomination with my tongue, or I otherwise do some filthy, unrighteous deed, right? And I say, but I'm still not as bad as John. And maybe I am still not as bad as John, but that's not how God is grading righteousness and wickedness. He grades them on an absolute scale. Okay, wickedness deserves the ultimate punishment. In fact, not just ultimate wickedness, but all wickedness. The ultimate punishment, and it makes more sense if you understand the ultimate punishment as being death, for dust thou art, and to dust thou shalt return. In fact, throughout the Psalms, that's what they're looking at, is like the death is the punishment. That death is the way that God brings justice to the world. And that ultimately that we all sort of answer for things we have done in life by losing our life. We've never been good enough to hold on to this forever. And that's true. It's like, my life, I've not been the best person, but I know that, I haven't and most of my moral goodness does not come from strength of character, it just comes from the inability to carry out evil. You know what I mean? Which in some corner of my heart might actually be, I would want to do. I mean, there have been evils I've wanted to do in my life that I couldn't do, but not because of right or wrong, but because of, and I wouldn't say fear of punishment so much as just not having, though that could be, that's also a lesser reason to do right? Like I do right because I fear punishment, or I do right because the evil I think to do, I don't have the spirit for it. You know, I don't have the guts. I mean, that to me, that's not a very morally satisfying thing to say. It's like, well, I didn't do evil because I didn't have the guts to do it. I really wanted to, but I just was too, reluctant to, I mean, just a question of timidity. So I'm not trying, I don't want to praise myself at all, but I could say that I haven't done some of the great evils that men do in this world. I mean, I could look at myself and say like, well, I'm not that bad, but I'm certainly not at all that good. I mean, the good that's in me, God has fostered some good things in me, through His Spirit, and through there are good things in my nature that are by nature good. But none of that is, none of the things I do outwardly are truly powerful enough to turn my life into something where it's like, this is a life that merits everlasting life. That like what this person has lived, what they deserve to get, the ultimate reward shouldn't be the ultimate punishment, but rather the ultimate gift. I shouldn't say gift, because the ultimate positive reward, which would be life everlasting, or that's what we're looking at it as. That's through resurrection. I can't redeem my life to that level, certainly not on my own. The only way, of course, in Christianity to redeem your life to the point where you are now where you can be considered worthy of everlasting life is through the blood of Jesus. We put our faith in Him, that He and basically entrust in the power of His resurrection. We put our faith in His sacrifice. He laid His life down, that our sins and our sinful nature itself could be forgiven and replaced with a new nature in Christ, which is created in Him to do good works and to be made after the image of God, and to be to walk in this world in the ways of righteousness and godliness. Like that is what God creates in us through His power and through faith. And in that and through that, we can be found worthy through the grace of God. Because again, He is going to overlook our past sins. He's going to transform our character. And on the basis of our faith in Christ, He accepts us into His kingdom. But you really can't get there. You can't really, it's hard to put your faith in Christ if you don't understand that you can't save yourself. You know what I mean? Because when you put yourself, because it makes yourself, because it makes your relationship with God, it sort of taints it. Because on some level, you don't understand where you really stand with God. You know what I mean? It's like you have a relationship with Him where you don't realize how utterly dependent you are upon Him. My salvation, I am utterly dependent upon Christ for my salvation. Like, I can't justify it by my life. I'm going to try to live a life ultimately that says, hey, that looks like what a life of salvation looks like. You know what I mean? But I can't take that life in and of itself as lived, meaning if you just extracted Christ from the equation, right? If you just took all my outward deeds and God's working in me, you don't even look at the fact that He's working in me. You just look at the improvements in my character. You look at my life and its trajectory. And let's say at the end of my life, I'm just about a perfect person. Like the last week I live a perfect life, or last year, last month, last decade, who knows? I live a virtually perfect life. Even looking at that outwardly and that very redemptive life, it still is not meritorious enough. It does not have the significant merit necessary to say, and now you deserve to live forever just based on the external life you lived. And what I'm saying is that it affects our relationship with God if we don't understand that. If we don't understand how dependent we are on him, we start depending more on ourselves because we don't realize where you know what I mean? And it has this vicious repeating cycle with the more you depend on yourself, the less you are depending on Christ, and the less you're actually partaking of the power and the gifts which God has given us through Christ to overcome the sins that are in your life. You know what I mean? And you know, when I say, well, Paul, what does that even look like, depending on Christ versus depending on yourself? Well, it's not a question of fold your hands and do nothing. It is a question of actually actively seeking out God for assistance and talking to God, even when it seems like you are not getting the response you want, immediately at least. Meaning you may not get a snap response out of God because that's not how it works, but to continue in pursuit of God for the sake of those things will result ultimately in success. We must not faint. We must not yield to the temptation that we should cease to pursue God for the gifts which he has given us in Christ, that we might actually receive them, as opposed to just have a promise, oh, you'll get some gifts someday. So, hey, how about those gifts? How about teaching me more knowledge concerning the things of the righteous ways of God? And we got to seek him out. That is, otherwise we will go astray and become filthy. We will not do good, and we will not be acceptable before God. I mean, as far as we will not live the life that if you extracted Christ from the equation and the grace and mercy which God is showing us because of our faith in him, if you extracted that from the equation, just looked at your life, ups and downs, goods and bads, it's like it's not going to add up to you live forever, no matter how your life went. Because we have to answer, because it's like, you can say, I'm not the same man. You know what I mean? When you get to the end of your life, I'm not the same man. But we also understand that it's like, we have to answer for our former selves. I mean, you can't just extract your current person, your current conscious moment from every conscious moment of your life. How can you extract that and say, like, that's not me? And we definitely, our justice system includes some crimes for which there are no statutes of limitations. Statute of limitations means, like, let's say you shoplifted and got away with it as a kid, right? You could talk about that now. Like, if I happen to have been busted shoplifting, but if, let's say, I'd got away with it, I might have got away with it. I think I lied to my parents and said, like, I'd never done it before. But, and I hadn't really, had I might not have, actually. I'm maybe done it once before. It's probably the second time because I got busted like the second time. But if I say, yeah, that first time it was in this Jewel Osco, I think. I don't even really remember if this is actually. I think it must have been because my buddy, we were kind of, he had kind of gotten me into it. It had sort of pushed me to do this, and he was doing it, and his friend was doing it, and and they were kind of like, yeah, and it was, it's so easy, and blah blah blah, just steal, right? And they kind of convinced me, and I tried it once, and it worked, and then I tried it again, and I got busted. The second time I got busted was at a Kmart, and I was banned from entering into Kmart until I was 18 without an adult. I could not come into the store on my own. And then, when I was, so what I'm saying is, like, there's that other incident, though. I didn't get busted at Jewel for stealing a little toy, but they can't prosecute me for it now. It's like, that was so long ago, and it was such a petty, small crime. People are willing to forgive these petty, small things, right? But we know, like, some things, like you murder someone, it doesn't matter that it's 20 years later, and I'm a new man. The people, human beings will not allow those crimes to go unpunished if they can find the person. It doesn't matter how much time goes by. You kill someone 20, 30, 40 years later, you can be held accountable for it under the laws of men. It's not any different in the law of God. While something, we think in terms of statute of limitations, we also know that some things, there are no real statutes of limitations. And truly, as far as the corruption of my character, it being a marker, the fact that I had stolen ever at all shows what I am made of. You know what I mean? I'm capable of violating someone else's property. Especially when I've been cajoled and, when I've been pressured for the sake of pleasing others. I will, I will hurt others to please others. Whatever, and I will make some calculation of like where, based on what it's going to do the most good for me. Maybe my social standing among my new friends at my new school is more important to me than right and wrong or stealing. So I will violate what's important to me in terms of right and wrong just for the sake of social advancement, of social acceptance in a new situation. I just don't have the moral fortitude, the moral fiber to resist. Have all the workers of iniquity no knowledge who eat up my people as they eat bread and call not upon the Lord? Yeah, as they eat bread, I think it means with what would that mean? As they eat bread, to me it's just without thinking. I mean, eat bread. You ever think about eating bread? I mean, maybe people do, but I'm saying carbs and all that stuff. No gluten, and people think about it like that. But I think in this analogy, that what it's saying is, it's not something they put a lot of thought into. I mean, they eat up my people like they eat up bread. It's not like, it's like a toad devouring a fly. It's like, what? Like it's the most right thing in the world to eat bread. What's wrong with eating bread? You know what I mean? What's wrong with eating bread? Well, nothing. I don't care what the diet people say. No bread. I'm talking about, what's wrong with it morally? Morally. What's wrong with eating bread? Nothing. Nothing at all. So what's wrong with eating up the poor? Eating up God's people and not calling on the Lord. It's no problem at all. No problem whatsoever. It's perfectly, of course, we're going to eat up the people like we eat up bread, because why not? Isn't that what it means to be in power? Isn't that what it means? Is we get to rule over people and gobble them up? Gobble up all their labor? Gobble up all their toil for ourselves? That's what. How might we fleece the people? How can we separate the wealth of the people from them, that it may be taken to us? They have no knowledge, not in the moral knowledge of they don't think. There's no understanding that yes, taking advantage of people is wrong. It is not like eating bread at all, which has no moral. No moral. There's nothing immoral or immoral about eating bread. So you could say something about eating. Some people will say it though. That I can't. Say well, bread is agriculture is destructive to the environment. Okay, yes, I know. I'm taking all that modern stuff out of the equation. There were they in great fear. Where is there? We have a location here. To look down. I looked up. There we go. Strange name. There were they in great fear, for God is in the generation of the righteous. I almost want to look at another I don't almost want to look at another translation. I want to look at another translation. There were they in great fear. 5. So let's see. Let's try the New American Standard. Let's just See if there's anything, because it'll be fairly similar, I think. But there they are in great dread. Okay, same thing. For God is with the righteous generation. It has to be something to do with, I guess when it says there, when they, where were they in great fear? Who was it then in great fear? Is it the righteous? You know, I mean, I'm just a little bit, I'm thinking, here's my thought process. There were they in great fear. The they is either going to be the workers of iniquity or my people. So you say, okay, there, wherever that is, in the congregation of the righteous, perhaps, in the place of God's judgment. We haven't really talked about God's judgment. We talked about God looking down from heaven on the deeds of men. Or are we talking, is the they the workers of iniquity? I think I said that. It's either the workers of iniquity or my people. If it's the workers of iniquity, the workers of iniquity are in great fear where? Well, if God is in the generation of the righteous, then when they become confronted with and they find themselves in the midst of the righteous, in the midst of God's people whom they have eaten up. You know what I mean? So, you know, and here we go. I think that's the path I like most, or maybe another interpretation, but I'm going to go with this one, okay? That when the wicked don't think anything of eating up God's people until they find themselves in the midst of the righteous generation. You know what I mean? Because in the righteous generation, God is. And that's where the justice of God is brought about. There is justice. Sometimes in the world, human beings execute justice. That's why we have a justice system. That's why we have a judicial system. That's to bring about the justice of God. Because God is in the generation of the righteous. That righteous judgment, God is in it. As it says of, the power, careful about how you are with the power, because he beareth not the sword in vain. I mean, the power of the state has the power to punish and to deal out punishment for good and evil, and they are supposed to be the ministers of God in that capacity. It's not always so. But inasmuch as they are carrying out God's justice, they ought to be respected as being the justice of God. When you come before justice, don't just have contempt for the court itself. You know what I mean? Some people get in trouble because they have this contempt for the very idea of human justice. But when they do justice, and it's not always carried out, but the point of the place, like for court or anything, is to bring justice. And the very idea that justice should be brought is to be respected, even if the people in it sometimes are not very respectable. You have shamed the counsel of the poor, because the Lord is his refuge. See, the poor take counsel in the Lord, and that God will see to it that what is right is done. But by getting away consistently with doing evil, the wicked shame the counsel of the poor. The counsel of the poor take is like God, they flee to God in the refuge and say, God will protect us, God will save us. And the workers of iniquity made them ashamed of their counsel. They shamed the counsel because they came in and violated the poor. And God let it happen. And they had trusted in God. Right? But they can be brought into great fear in the generation of the righteous. I mean, when it says generation, let's look it up real quick. I want to say generation of the righteous. Door period. All right. All right. Let's look at this word. I wish I'd done this first. All right. Just going to fix everything real quick. There we go. And now we can do that, and it doesn't look stupid. No, but it does that anyway. So it says, generation of the righteous. The quick definition says, door. D-O-W-R, but whatever. Not like D-O-O-R. But it reminds me of the word door. It means period, according to the quick definition, it says period, generation, and dwelling. Let's look at a little more here. A masculine, see definition, period, generation, dwelling. The New American Standard, exhaustive concordance, period, generation, dwelling. Okay. What does Strong say? And I can't follow the lexicon. They say age, evermore, generation, never posterity. Or shortened door is from dur, properly a revolution of time. An age or generation, also a dwelling, is translated age, evermore, generation, ever, posterity. It's interesting. They say it can be a dwelling. Boy, that would be a lot more convenient for interpretation, right? Because then we could say the Lord, God is in the dwelling of the righteous. But that is kind of what generation means also. Like generation, when we think of generations in terms of time, like my generation is called Generation X, and it's the people who were born within a certain period of time. And we are all sort of contained in this sort of self-contained universe, in a sense, of our experience. Like the way I grew up I grew up in a different world than the one we live in now. It's one of the things that's driving me insane lately. It's because so they see my world shifting around me, and I'm like, I don't think I'm allowed to go along with that. I feel compelled that as a person who has been entrusted with the responsibility of this self-governing nation persisting to the future, I have to use my voice to speak up when I see wicked men corrupting the things which we were entrusted with and destroying the institutions that were given us, that we might have proper self-government and not despotic rule by tyrants and by rulers, but rather we would have people who we elect to lead and to represent us and to look after our interests, and that's what they're supposed to be doing. And many of them do think that is what they're doing, even if they are not doing so, in my opinion. I always, that it's important for government to work, even when the other side elects a leader. I have to at least trust and believe that they're trying, even though I don't agree maybe with their tactics, that they are trying to do what's best for our country. Right? But when you lose that feeling, when you start feeling instead that I think what they're trying to do is destroy our country. You know what I mean? Now I have trouble, getting on board with the other side having power, because I start looking at them as a threat to the very nation in which we live, a nation for which I have been given responsibility. We've all been given responsibility, because that's how this nation works. We have a republic. We have to defend the republic against threats, foreign and domestic. And that means, first of all, speaking. Speak first, I will speak. I will be heard if I can, get anyone to listen. Sometimes it's funny, because sometimes I think, like, why do I try so hard? So men of a certain generation represent this sort of insulated group of people. You know what I mean? And so it's like a dwelling. And so the generation of the righteous, when it talks about the generation of the righteous, it's like sort of this fantasy of that there might rise up a righteous generation. A generation, you look at like the American Revolution, people always point out like flaws, or though they had slaves and stuff. It's like, they grew up in a world in which that existed. Imagine growing up in a world where you looked at these people and you're like, who are those people? They look different. Like, those are slaves. They're not really human. You know what I mean? That's what you're taught as a child. You may free yourself from that as an adult. But now you've come into adulthood and inherited a world in which that is the reality. It's not easy to just get rid of it. I mean, to get rid of slavery, it took a massive civil war in which hundreds of thousands of Americans died, over in the fight over this. It's like people say, was the Civil War II fought over? Some people say, well, they didn't agree with the secession, or some people say it was for slavery. It wasn't. When I wrote my recent song, I said it was fought due to slavery, and that's you can't. That's, in my mind, it's uncontestable that slavery was the cause of the war. Maybe that's not why the immediate cause of why they were fighting when the war started. Like each fight, when they started going to fight, it was like, well, because they captured Fort Sumter. I think it was Fort Sumter, wasn't that where they raided it, and the attack on Fort Sumter, I thought, was the actual initial sort of clash. Though there might have been smaller things, previous to that. That was like the one that really got things going. Could be totally wrong. My history is, like I said, this is just going based on what I remember history to be. So, anyways, there was an immediate cause, an immediate clash, and then a war broke out. But what was really going on in the background was there was all this conflict in the country over free states, slave states, and it's not so easy. But here's the thing. You look at the founding fathers, there was something righteous in that generation that they set up their government in a righteous way for the men could be free and that men would be responsible for themselves, mostly. And they gave us a republic. But, and if you're like me and you have any ounce of patriotism, and you do not, and like in the fact that many of them own slaves is not something you find scandalous at all, because if they didn't, it'd be different if they lived in this century. Do you know that, the current president, he used to own slaves? I mean, that's definitely a problem now, because now I expect men to know better, because it's not like I said, but like there comes generations where men's hearts are stirred up. You know what I mean? And it seems like a generational thing because they have to rise up together. People have to rise up together to do good, to at least in the world, to bring about justice, to cause the workers of iniquity to be in great fear. I mean, it has to be a generation. It has to be a certain... there has to be people certainly sort of contained within a period of time, a place, a movement of some sort that will put the workers of iniquity into fear. When they find themselves in the midst of the generation of the righteous, they will fear. That's what verse 5 means. I mean, the workers of iniquity, the workers of evil, come when they find themselves in the midst of the generation of the righteous, people who start seeking righteousness, people who start living out righteous lives and trying to bring justice into the world. Now, the wicked have fear. Because when God is in that generation, they see God in the world and they begin to fear because they say in their heart, there is no God, I fear not God. But then when they see God in a man, they fear the man. You know what I mean? Like, they don't necessarily fear God. But when God is manifest in men, the wicked tremble in fear. Now, that's why it is important for us to seek to know God, to seek the knowledge and understanding of God, so that men could be in fear. Because when they see the righteous Lord manifest in you, though they fear not God, they can be made to fear men. And by fearing men in whom God has put his spirit, there's a possibility of redemption even for the wicked, because they could see the righteous judgment of God and snap to understanding, like, I can never prosper this way, and I must be reconciled to the right way, to the way of God. So we talked about that verse 6 already, about the shaming the counsel of the poor, because, hey, they took refuge in the Lord. And they put it to shame by, when people take refuge in the Lord, like, God can't protect you, I'm taking your home. Oh, that the salvation of Israel will come. We want to see God's judgment come forth out of the place where God dwells. Because when it talks about coming out of Mount Zion, it's like, that's because God's earthly dwelling place was Zion. I mean, as far as that's where they built the temple. And God, that's his holy hill, where his presence on earth was manifest in the temple. He would manifest himself through the, through the sacrifices and through the things. It's like there would be the mercy seat, and there was a veil behind which no one but the high priest could pass, and him not without blood to approach close to God. There was like an earthly place where one could approach to God, to the inner sanctum, to the Holy of Holies, as it was called. Right? And so there's a sense that there's a core place of God's power on earth. It's often hidden. It's often deep down. And I think now, not in terms of the temple, but in terms of us. The salvation of Israel can come out of Zion, but it can also come out of his servants. When he stirs up his servants to do his work. When the Lord bringeth back the captivity of his people, when he returns their captivity, meaning they're taken captive and he takes them back. And we can be taken captive by any number of things, by circumstances, by sin, by all, because the captivity of the Israelites was also likened to the captivity of sin. Like, that's not an analogy that I have to make up. It's an analogy that's been made in the Bible. That being brought into captivity and into bondage is an analogy for the experience of the human in terms of sin. And like I said, a lot of the sins I commit are bound up in the sins of the people around me and bound up in the sinful world in which I live. I mean, if the world was totally righteous, it would be somewhat easier to be righteous yourself. You know what I mean? If you had a righteous world around you, I'm not saying you'd necessarily be perfect, but let's say it would help. You know what I mean? I don't think there's any argument to be made there that it would help. When God returns us from captivity, lifts us out of the place where we are held captive, where we have no power to extract ourselves, no power to free ourselves, to make ourselves, to stand up and, make so that we might receive the goodness of God. And so the psalm closes with that, looking forward to the salvation of God, looking forward to the bringing forth out of captivity of God's people, to be delivered from, the wicked, the men in the world who, when you look down and you see evil, people know, it's like they say there's nothing but evil in the world. But a lot of times people are looking at the big men, the leaders, the stuff like that, and there is definite problems there, but we also have to look to ourselves. And if we first, put ourselves into the generation of the righteous, if we can first ourselves enter into a covenant with God that brings us into the place where where we can take the beams out of our own eyes. And through that, there's hope that there is salvation for God's people, that there is rejoicing and making glad in the Lord our God, because his salvation is brought to pass. All right, and so we're done. We're over a bit. We'll start Psalm 15 tomorrow. Thanks for joining me in this study. Look forward to continuing in the Psalms with you tomorrow, and we're going to continue for a little while. I'll figure out where we're stopping sometime soon. Oh, and now I gotta go. I lost my theme music. Maybe I should go a silent outro with no theme music. You can just I had to close the window and the. Let's just pick something. Here we go.
My refuge and my fortress, my high tower and my deliverer, my shield and he in whom I trust. Lord, what is man that thou takest knowledge of him? Or the son of man that thou makest account of him? Man is like unto vanity. His days are as a shadow that passeth away. Bow thy heavens, O Lord, and come down. Touch the mountains, and they shall smoke.